Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast, episode 113.
Honest citizens like you protect themselves every day. We talk about it every week on the Self-Defense Gun Stories podcast. Were these gun owners lucky, or did they have a plan? How should we defend the people we love? We discuss recent examples on the Self-Defense Gun Stories podcast. Put us in your pocket.
Welcome to the Out of Order Podcast, your window into the firearms community, exploring those shaping the future of our rights and protecting our lifestyle, laws, legal cases, activism, and self-defense in a candid and honest podcast for our brothers and sisters in arms. Here's your host, James Kalita.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 113 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Show notes page for today's episode is outoforderjameskalita.com/113. Today's sponsors are ScottShot, ScottShot.com. Whether you are taking a class as a complete beginner or an experienced, highly competent shooter seeking an NRA or US CCA instructor certification, ScottShot classes are comfortable, friendly, and taught with a high instructor-to-student ratio. And by Self-Defense Gun Stories podcast. Rob Morse has analyzed over 400 citizens' defensive uses of force with various self-defense instructors from throughout the country. So head over to your favorite podcatcher and check out Self-Defense Gun Stories podcast. Today's guest is Professor Walter Block. Professor Block has written over 500 peer-reviewed articles. He is the senior fellow of the Ludwig von Mises Institute and author of Defending the Undefendable. And now here's Professor Block. Professor Block, welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Professor Block, a lot of my listeners are conservative. They come to firearms and the right to self-protection from the conservative mindset. And I'm wondering if you would share with us the libertarian perspective or your perspective on where the right to self-defense comes from.
Right. The conservatives are more likely to say, well, it's in the Constitution, it's in the Second Amendment, but, suppose there were no Constitution or suppose there were no Second Amendment, we still have a right to defend ourselves. The essence of libertarianism, and if you ask 10 libertarians something, you're likely to get more than 10 answers, but my view is that libertarianism is pretty much heavily predicated on the non-aggression principle. And it means that you can do anything you want, anything, as long as it does not constitute a threat or an initiation of violence against innocent people. So does a gun constitute a threat or per se violence against someone? No. Yes, it can be used for bad purposes, but so can a baseball bat or a hockey stick or, a knife or a fork or, fists. So I think it's not so much self-defense, although self-defense is very important. It's rather, does it pass muster under the litmus test of the non-aggression principle, the NAP? And in my view, it does. Now, there are some weapons that don't pass muster. Murray Rothbard mentioned the atom bomb. It would be illegitimate for you to keep an atom bomb in your basement. You live in a city, say, because if it blew up, you'd impact a lot of people, not just the bad guys. On the other hand, if we all lived on Jupiter and everyone had 100,000 square miles and you had the atom bomb or the nuclear device in the middle of your territory and it went off, it wouldn't impact anyone else, so that would be legitimate. So I think the libertarian predicates support for guns and opposition to gun control on the fact that it's not per se a violation of rights. And if you want to have gun control, what about knife control and bat control and fist control and long fingernails controls? It's true a gun can kill more people, but knives are pretty deadly too. And I think we should treat a gun just like a big knife, and you can have as big a knife as you want.
Thank you. And so there's this idea in the firearms community that you have to be Republican, vote Republican in order to save your gun rights. But that hasn't worked out for us historically. We have more gun control laws now than we ever had. Can the Libertarian Party or just the libertarian philosophy help people protect their rights?
Yes, I think so, because I think it's a very nice, clean way of looking at it. The Second Amendment and the Constitution, well, from a purist, anarchist, libertarian point of view, Lysander Spooner said that the Constitution is of no authority since we didn't all agree to it. And possibly there'd be a Constitution without a Second Amendment. We'd still have a right to do it, not just to defend ourselves, but because it is not a violation of rights to have a gun, and therefore anyone who stops someone from having a gun is violating that person's rights. So I think that the libertarian axiom or the libertarian principle certainly is coincidental with the conservatives on this issue, although we approach it perhaps with a slightly different justification system.
And something else I think Lysander Spooner said was that if the Constitution has either failed to prevent the government we have, or else it allows for it, and either way, it's failed.
Yes. On the other hand, it is a pretty good document, and the way I see libertarianism, there are really like 4 or 5 stages. At the top is anarcho-capitalism. This would be Murray Rothbard. The next step below that would be minarchism, or limited government libertarianism, and the most famous people there are Ayn Rand and Robert Nozick. And here the government has one function: protect people and property rights, and only 3 institutions to do that: armies to keep foreign bad guys off of us, not to go exporting democracy; police to keep local bad guys off of us, not to stop victimless crimes like sex or drugs; and then courts to determine, who's right in case of any altercation. So that's the second level. And the third level down would be constitutionalism. And the person most famous associated with that would be Ron Paul. Ron Paul pretty much says, the Constitution was very good, and whatever it says, he'll go along with. It's not a perfect document. It allowed post roads and post offices, but it's very, very good if it were interpreted properly, of course, not the way the present Supreme Court does. And then the fourth level would be classical liberals. And the most famous of these are Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek. And you have armies, courts, and police, and you have a constitution, but you have other things too, public goods, so-called, and I don't know, a little bit of welfare and a little interference here and a little interference there. But by and large, they're pretty free enterprise. There's a joke. The Economist was asked, "How is your wife?" And the answer came, "Compared to what?" Well, compared to Murray Rothbard, Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek are a bunch of pinkos. But compared to, Donald Trump or Hillary, Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek are magnificent. And then the fifth level down is thick libertarians, where they add on extraneous things, like they say, well, in order to be a libertarian, you have to like chess, or you have to dislike Mozart, or something irrelevant. And I would reject that, but I would call them libertarians at the lowest level. So I think all 5 levels would agree with me that having a gun is not a per se violation of rights. And therefore, I think libertarians are united on the idea that people should be allowed to have self-protection, self-defense, and through a firearm if they want to.
And you mentioned, that those top 2 levels where anarcho-capitalists believe that it's going to be completely voluntary, and then the minarchist level will allow for the existence of a government for military. And how do anarcho-capitalists visualize defense being provided within the absence of in a standing army?
Well, defense agencies, private police. Right now in the United States, there are more private police, shopping malls and banks and places like that, than there are government police. And, My motto is, if it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. And since everything either moves or doesn't move, privatize everything. And I think that a private defense agency would be much better than a public one, because most people wouldn't pay their private defense agency to make you not smoke pot, or make me not be a prostitute or whatever. Namely, they wouldn't do this victimless crime business. They would just say, look, we don't want to be mugged. We don't want to be raped. We don't want to be murdered. Stop that. And then the police could more narrowly focus on what their customers wanted. Whereas right now, through the political process, we've got all these extraneous things where the police are doing things that they really shouldn't be doing, namely penalizing victimless criminals. They criminalize all sorts of things, and that wouldn't occur. So I think we would have competing defense agencies, and if the Acme agency did a good job, it would increase its scope and make profits, and if it did a poor job, it would go broke. But the police department in Chicago and New Orleans and Newark and Baltimore, they're not doing that great a job. There's a lot of crime there, and can they ever go broke? No. Look, the reason we have pretty good pizza and pretty good shoes and pretty good, I don't know what, pens, is because if you do a shoe or a pen or a bicycle or something like that, and you do it well, you can expand your base of operation. And if you do poorly, you have to go out into another business because you're going to be bankrupt. And that's why we have pretty good things, the pedestrian things that we sort of take for granted, air conditioning and, I don't know, clothing or bicycles, things like that, ice skates. But it doesn't work with police. If the police do a lousy job, you can't fire them. They're it, you're sort of stuck with them.
Yeah, and that's something that comes up when people talk about private defense, is that you have to worry about the police force just becoming its own government, but you can fire them and choose another one. And that's something, no matter how totalitarian your local government becomes, you can't choose another one unless you leave. You can't hire a different police force to protect you from the government police force.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. There is no competition, and that's one of the reasons that they do such a poor job. Another one is that they start out violating the libertarian axiom of non-aggression, because they tax you. Whether you like it or not, you have to pay. And it's not only police, it's also public schools and roads and everything else that the government provides. So deontologically, it's illegitimate. And from a pragmatic utilitarian point of view, they're very inefficient.
So one of the things that people bring up is that there really wouldn't be a way to the freeloader principle, I think it's referred to, that if we went with private police and private defense, that people would just not pay, and then these services would not exist. But do libertarians do?
I don't think that's right. I think that the first time, let's say I don't subscribe to any police force, but I have to be somewhere. I have to exist somewhere, and maybe it'll be on a private street or in a shopping mall. And the shopping mall owner will certainly have police, and the private road owner will have police. So even though I don't want to subscribe additionally, I will get the benefit. Now, I'm not a free rider any more than you're a free rider when you go to a supermarket and they put the lights on. The reason that they put the lights on is they want customers to see what's going on. And if they didn't put the lights on, they wouldn't get too many customers. Well, it's similar here. The road owner or the mall owner or the hotel owner wants to have police so that people will feel secure. And they pay for it. Not directly. You don't pay directly for the lighting in the supermarket, and you wouldn't pay directly for the policeman on a private road or in a shopping mall, but it's figured into the prices of everything. So private people would pay for it, and I think this is a much better system than the government one, again, for two reasons. One, because without competition, they're very inefficient, and they produce the wrong things, like stopping victimless criminals. And also, deontologically, as a matter of rights, you're compelled to pay for this whether you like it or not.
So if if we've reached a few people today and they're thinking, I've been a Republican, but I want to explore libertarianism, where's the best place for them to start?
Well, I recommend two places. One is the Mises Institute. They're in Auburn, Alabama, and not only do they do libertarianism, they also do economics, and they sort of follow Mises and Rothbard. That would be one very good place. Another very good place would be the Ron Paul Institute. He's got a magnificent institute going. Another one would be Hans Hoppe. He's in Turkey. He's got this Peace and Property Rights Society. So there are various groups, and then various strong libertarian groups, and then there are other moderate libertarian groups like Cato and Reason and AEI and Heritage, which are more conservative than libertarian. But Cato and Reason and PERC, Political Economy Research Center, IEA in England are all libertarian light. Pretty good, not as rabid as they should be, or as they could be, but they're pretty good. So if a Republican or a Democrat is looking around because they're not fully satisfied with their present political home, I would recommend those places, especially the Mises Institute and Ron Paul's efforts.
Do you think that, and I understand that libertarianism is separate from the Libertarian Party, but do you think people primarily concerned with firearms rights, is there a home for them in the Libertarian Party? Can they? Is there more hope for them there?
I'm such a moron. Of course, I should have mentioned the LP, the Libertarian Party, and then there are a whole bunch of think tanks that I did mention, Cato and Reason and Mises Institute. But yes, the LP does yeoman work. Now, I don't agree with everything that they do, but then again, I don't agree with everything that anyone does, even including myself. Sometimes I change my mind, so the old Walther was wrong. But certainly the Libertarian Party is a vehicle, is a fountainhead of information. I've been involved in the Libertarian Party before it even started federally. I think it started federally in 1971, and I ran for office in 1969 in New York State, just for the local state Libertarian Party. So I'm a big fan of the Libertarian Party, and we got 3% of the vote, which is gigantic compared to our usual 0.5% or 0.75%. Ron Paul ran as a presidential candidate once for the LP. He did much more efficiently and more effectively when he ran for office on the Republican ticket. And he was a congressman for many years, and he was a Republican congressman, not a Libertarian congressman. So, but notwithstanding that, I am a big fan of the Libertarian Party. I think it does great work. Murray Rothbard used to say, look, most times the average guy who likes beer and pizza and bowling, he's not really concerned about politics, but every 2 years or every 4 years, and now it's stretching into a longer time period, all of a sudden he's interested in this. He's interested in Hillary versus Donald. So why shouldn't we libertarians also get a part of the megaphone or a part of the podium and run for office? And even if we don't win, if we get more votes than the difference between the two major parties, then people will sit up and take notice, and they'll have to, the word liberty will now be utilized. So I think the Libertarian Party is a very good vehicle to promote liberty, even though I don't agree with every action of the LP. For example, they nominated Bob Barr. And Bob Barr was as libertarian as my bicycle is, namely not libertarian at all. So they make mistakes, but, that's why they put erasers at the end of pencils. And so, as I say, I think the Libertarian Party is a very important part of the movement. It's not the entire movement. There are many, many other aspects of the Libertarian movement, but the Libertarian Party is certainly a big one and an important one.
Thank you. And I guess every couple of years it comes up too that voting for third-party candidates is a waste, even if they're and it comes up in my circle where even if they're much better on gun rights, they're not going to win, so there's no point in voting. But there's such a small percentage of the population that votes, and I think a lot of people automatically assume you have to get more than half of the vote, but if there's more than two parties, you don't need to get more than half of the vote. So, yeah, I think it's really, well, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, on voting third party and winning.
Yeah, well, obviously we're not going to win, although there are congressmen now, 3 or 4 congressmen who are pretty libertarian, even though they're on the Republican Party. They're in the Freedom Caucus of the Republican. And there's also a Libertarian caucus in the Republican Party as well. I don't think it's a wasted vote because, as I say, if we get 3% of the vote and the 2 major parties each get, I don't know, 47.5% or 48.5%, and we have more than the difference between the 2 major parties, well, then everyone is going to sit up and take notice and say, well, who are these guys? What's this liberty business? What this liberty business is apart from slavery and a few other important deviations, the U.S. Was dedicated and predicated and started on the basis of liberty. So I think there's a home for a Libertarian Party, and I don't think you're wasting the vote. I wanted to mention 2 other things on guns that you haven't asked me. So since I prepared for them, I'm going to ask you to ask me.
Okay.
And one of them is, but if we had freedom to own guns, wouldn't we have all these high school shootings? And that's bad. And the other one was, well, okay, the Constitution at the time, all we had was muskets. And, you don't need more than a musket to go hunting a deer, or maybe, just a small pistol, but you certainly don't need automatic weaponry or a bazooka or machine guns or a tank or anything like that. So those are the 2 issues that I want you to ask me about. So start asking me.
All right. So, we hear a lot about school shootings in the United States, and a lot of my listeners think that it's, overreported and that defensive uses of firearms are underreported. But how would you answer someone who said, yeah, if we had more firearms, there'd be more shootings?
Well, there is some truth in that, and that is that if somehow I had a magic power and I could snap my fingers and all guns disappeared, well, then by definition, there'd be fewer shootings and probably there'd be less violence because guns are more efficient than knives or baseball bats. But that's not our option. Our option is that if we pass a law saying, no one should have a gun, and we make it very strict that only target shooters or Olympic pistol shooters can get a gun, well, then who's going to be in charge? Strong, big men will be in charge, and small, weaker women will not. But the gun is the great equalizer. I mean, take Mike Tyson, who's, 250 pounds and 6'2" or something, or 6'1", and take a woman who, not that I'm saying Mike Tyson is guilty of anything, but a person like that, and now take a woman who's 5'2" and eyes of blue and weighs 105 pounds. Who's going to win a fight between a Mike Tyson type and this woman? Obviously, the Mike Tyson type. But if they each have a revolver or a 9-bullet pistol, all of a sudden they're equal. In my school, they're always having this take back the night, we're against rape. And of course, everyone's against rape. But the best way to protect women is to allow them to have guns. So my idea would be, there are 2 Olympic events where you have guns. One is target shooting in the summer, and the other is this, I think it's called biathlon or something like that, where you ski a little bit, then you take a rifle and you shoot something, and then you go ski again. Well, if we had a girls' or a women's pistol shooting team, the rapists would wonder, well, does this young lady have a gun in her handbag, and would be a lot more, a lot less likely to accost someone. Okay, now this thing about high school shootings, an interesting thing is that I think something like 99 or 98% of all these mass shootings are in gun-free zones. Well, if you're in a gun-free zone and law-abiding people will law-abide and they won't bring a gun into a gun-free zone even though they have a concealed carry permit, well, then you can kill a lot of people. But if 1/5 of all the college students or the high school students, and this includes the teachers, had a gun, he might get away with killing 1 or 2 people, but before he starts killing the 3rd person, there are going to be 20 people aiming at him. So I think that, there are very few rapes right in the middle of a police station. Why? Well, because criminals aren't stupid. They're evil, but they're not stupid. They know that if they start messing around in a police station, or in Texas where men are men, or, and what do they say? An armed society is a polite society. So I think that this gun-free zone is a very bad thing. And look, we have guards for banks and shopping malls. Why shouldn't we have guards? Not necessarily teachers, because there's specialization in division of labor, but anyone who can get a concealed carry permit knows something about guns, because you have to, pass some tests to do it. And I think we'd be much safer. Yes, we'd be safer if no one had a gun, but that's not the option. The option is, given that a lot of people have the guns, a lot of honest people and a lot of criminals have guns, and now we pass a law against guns, only the honest people are going to give up their guns. The criminals will keep theirs, and now the criminals will steal a march on honest people, so we certainly don't want that.
Hey, and now I think I forgot your other question. But,
muskets.
Muskets. Oh, yeah, right. Second Amendment only applies to muskets. Right. We hear that one a lot.
What the critics say is, well, okay, we'll let you have a musket, because, the Second Amendment was drawn up in the 18th century. And in the 18th century, nobody had any automatic weaponry or anything fancy where you can shoot, 100 bullets in 10 seconds or something like that. Let them have muskets. See, a lot of people think, well, the only reason you need a gun is to target shoot or to kill a deer or a bear or, something like that. But no, the reason they had the Second Amendment was not to have target shooting or hunting. It was to be safe from the government. I mean, Hitler was a big gun control freak. Oh boy, was he good on guns, good in the sense that he wanted to prevent anyone from having them. Look, he killed supposedly 6 million Jews. Suppose every adult Jew had a gun. Do you think he would have killed that many? I think that he might have said, yeah, they're vermin, we got to get rid of them, or they're termites or whatever they are. But if we mess with them, I'm going to lose one division. And I need that for the Russians or the British or whoever. So I'll make a deal with the Jews. I'll say, look, Jews, you're vermin. You got to get out of here. But we'll give you safe passage. We'll let you out with your guns and, just get out of here. That's a lot better to be banished than to be murdered. So I think Hitler is the poster boy for gun control. He didn't want anyone to have a gun because, an armed society is a polite society, and an armed society is one safe from the government, not just private enterprise criminals, but public criminals. Government, a bunch of robber gang people, because they initiate violence through taxes. They tax people who haven't agreed to it. So the whole ethos of the Second Amendment at its inception was that we have to protect ourselves from the government, because, there's this guy Rummel, I forget his first name, and what he did is he calculated the number of people killed by government in the 20th century, apart from wars, and he came up with something ungodly, 200 million people. Well, 200 million people is a big score from government, compared to which the Blood and the Crips and the Mafia are pikers. They're safe citizens practically. So yes, if you want us citizens to have only muskets, well, then the government should only have muskets. And if the government's going to have more sophisticated weaponry, well, then so should the people, because the whole point of this was to protect us not only from criminals and not only from bears, but also from the government. So yes, you want to have muskets? Fine. Let the government have muskets also.
Thank you. And I always ask my guests if there are books that they recommend, and you've written several. Is there one that you recommend everybody start with, or is there, I know you've written over 500 articles too. Is there a book or an article?
That's a nasty question, and I'm shocked that you would ask me that. You're an evil person, because it's sort of like asking a parent, which kid do you love more? All of my books are my intellectual children. I love them all. But I guess I'm most famous for defending the undefendable, defending the undefendable 1, and I have a follow-up, defending the undefendable 2. I'm now working on defending the undefendable 3. And I guess my most recent books, the one on privatizing roads, because government roads kill 40,000 people a year, and privatizing rivers, lakes, and bodies of water, and also privatizing the space race. So I would mention them, but I've done maybe 25 different books, and I love them all, and they're all great. So if you're interested in getting my version of libertarianism and you're tuning in here, just Google me and look at, everything I've written and pick what interests you the most.
Professor Block, I thank you so much for being on the show. Any parting words for our listeners?
Keep up the good work. Thanks for having me. I'm a big fan of your show, and I hope to come on again in, a couple of months.
Great. Looking forward to it. Thanks again for tuning in to episode 113 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Show notes page for today's episode is outoforderjameskalita.com/113. Please visit the show notes page. You'll find links to Professor Block's books, to the links we discussed, and thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.